information. Um, Thank you all. Now that we have covered the reasons for choosing controlled environment agriculture as a farming approach and the overall introduction of the farms, let's move on to our next segment, which explores the challenges related to controlled environment agriculture and how our speakers have responded to the challenges. So, Lesley, if you don't mind, we would like to begin with you again. Do you think that controlled environment agriculture is an economically viable way of farming?
Great question. It depends, is my best answer. So, hoop houses, fantastic use of your resources. They have dramatic impacts. So I'm thinking of a piece of plastic stretched over some kind of metal structure that may or may not have a fan to pull air through. That's a great use of your money. Greenhouses also have demonstrated themselves to be really economically beneficial to a lot of Canadian farmers. We've done a bit of economic analysis, and it seems as though greenhouse farmers in Canada can charge a slight premium for their strawberries or whatever they're selling. And the data that I have is actually from strawberries. So I'm going to limit my talk to that. So they can charge a slight premium, but it's not a radical change in price. It would be sort of 50 cents more than outdoor imported strawberries at the same time of year. So there's an advantage to having local food, and you can charge a premium, and greenhouse production is very financially viable. It becomes more challenging in the area of indoor farming where there are no windows. And so the challenge is that these environments require light, of course, because they're plants, unless you're doing mushrooms. So mushroom indoor farming is also economically viable indoors without light. The indoor farming without light has a regular challenge of you have to pay for electricity. So the technology in and of itself to install into an indoor farm is expensive because you need to purchase the lights, but then you also need to keep the lights running. And so the infrastructure to connect the amount of power that you need to run significant amounts of lights can be expensive. So I'm trying to think of the expenses that you would be purchasing. And so those are really quite challenging for indoor producers. We have seen, Andrew was mentioning Ripple Farms, and I don't actually know why they went out of business, but Ripple Farms is not the only container or not the only indoor farm that has gone out of business semi-recently. We have records of at least 6 that went out of business in 2023 from North America. And so we think it is a relatively challenging experience. It's not impossible, but the general pattern we've seen is generally, unlike Ripple Farms, generally a container farm is easier to be economically viable than a farm you would install in a warehouse and do the same work with. So if I can give my ratings, that's what I would give for the tendency for economic viability. The fewer pieces of equipment you have to buy, the less electricity you need, the more likely you can compete with local prices for a variety of foods. Does that answer the question, Kinley?
Yes,
Trying to keep it in 2
definitely.
minutes. That's where I'm trying to limit myself. We will be, just maybe I can say one more thing. So my lab is producing a market research report on vertical farms. We're going to be releasing it to the public. It's not private. So we'll be sharing this with you at some point in the next 6 months. And so you'll be able to see all of this information as well. But that's, yeah, just so you know.
Okay, thank you, Lesley. That was very informative. To highlight some key points, to in order for a farm to be more economically viable, we have to look for a farm that will take up less resources, like hoop houses, indoor farming, like mushroom farming without lighting system, and uh, vertical farm which is located outdoor is much more economically viable than something that is located inside a warehouse. So that is a very important point to note. And thank you very much. Next, we would like to hear from Lucía again. Could you please share your
Hello,
thoughts on
Kinley.
how Reyes Farm has navigated these challenges and any strategies that you have employed to ensure economic sustainability?
Sure. So here we are analyzing two important factors. One is the crops we are growing. So we're trying to grow the best crop mix to guarantee that we have value. No one or almost no one is going to make a lot of money growing lettuce. Maybe that's the case in Canada, but in Portugal and Southern Europe, lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, they have such a cheap price because they are produced everywhere that we cannot really make a margin out of that. On the other hand, we can make a margin with specialty fresh herbs and crops that are out of season. So that's where we have been focusing on. And then another important thing is the client. So if we were to sell to supermarkets, the margins will be very, very narrow and they will be always pushing down the prices. So we definitely chose not to do that. We're selling directly to the consumer when they come to the farm. And we are also selling to bars and restaurants. So these are not really big restaurants. These are more like small restaurants that are willing to pay a good price for the produce being delivered to their doorstep. We are using bikes. We are using electric bikes to do these deliveries. And I think when we are talking about controlled environment agriculture and very small farms like ours, is not only about the produce we grow and the customers we have, but also the experiences we can offer. We have seen that people are more willing to pay for an experience than for a plant. So we offer all these sort of experiences at the farm where people can come and visit and have a workshop, or come and visit, have a workshop and have some appetizers, or even come visit, have a workshop and have full lunch with us, with the produce that we grow at the farm. And that has really increased the amount of money that we can make every month when we added these experiences to the mix. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lucía. That was very informative, and I really like the idea of using sustainable form of transportation to transport the produces across within the city. So would any of the other panelists like to talk about economic viability of the farm? No? Okay. So moving on to the next challenge, which is technical expertise, equipment failure, setup, and design. Aki, could you please share your
Actually,
experience?
sorry, I was stuck on mute. I did want to speak to the financial aspect. I know there
Okay.
seemed to be a little discussion regarding lettuce, but I think the point that Aki had made earlier, which we'll also touch on now, is the fact that if you can find a niche market in the way that you produce your lettuce, you can actually charge a premium. And so if you have, from a cultural sensitivity perspective, a community that will only eat lettuce if it can be proven to be bug-free, and you can set up an operation that can actually produce bug-free lettuce, then you have the opportunity to actually charge a premium and potentially make the operations of a CEA actually financially viable. Now, I'll just leave it at that, and because we are proving that right now in the kosher marketplace, and we hope someday into the halal marketplace as well, where there is also a restriction on eating bugs. Aki, I'll turn it over to you since Kinley was asking you to take on the next part.
Yeah.
It's okay. Maybe we can give opportunity to the audience to ask question since we're finishing the first section. So anyone has any question, you can unmute yourself and ask question to our speakers. Okay. Seems
Yes.
like yeah.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
can I ask
Yes.
Kinley? Shah. My name is Shah. So I would like to know, maybe Andrew or any other speaker can explain how the pollution is controlled in CAA, environmental agriculture. How pollution is controlled? I think Andrew or any other speaker can speak. Thanks, Kinley.
That's a good question. I don't know that I know much about that actually. What kind of pollution did you mean? Like
yeah, you mentioned in your speech that you are controlling pollution when growing your products. So if you do not control, it's all right. If you do not control pollution, it's okay. But any other speaker can tell about how we can control the pollution, because pollution is important thing for greenhouse gas emission. Yeah. So
Hi, Sean, that was a great question. So in our system, just as one example, we prevent water runoff from our system so that we're not actually leaking any extra fertilizers into the ecosystem. So we have a circular water system that we don't allow water to be released. And that's pretty common in a lot of greenhouse environments where they don't actually allow for release. The second thing we often do is put a filter over the air intake, so we're not pulling in a lot of smog into a very small container. And so that probably is in a lot of other people's spaces. So those are just two examples of the ways in which it might be in a controlled environment agriculture, but that's at the higher end of the technology side. In a hoop house, you might not do anything.
Thanks, Lesley. Thanks.
I can also add a little bit to the water pollution side of things. We are using a carbon filter and a sediment filter. And at some point we were also using a UV light that would guarantee the quality of the water. And we are also using a filter for the air that is coming from the outside to inside the farm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Lucía.
Fred here. I think I can also add, in our case, we had to go through City of Vaughan water. They were actually testing the output of our systems to make sure that any of the growth chemicals that we've been using are not affecting the water, the wastewater stream in any way, shape, or form. And we passed that test with City of Vaughan. Believe me, they put us through many different tests for that you wouldn't expect to be put through, including how long can your container exist if a fire broke out? Can it hold the fire for 1 hour, 2 hours before it could spread anywhere else? So we were not only dealing with pollution issues, but some of the things that we ran into that took quite a bit of time because of the differences between building codes and fire codes in the City of Vaughan was this issue of how long the firewall on the side closest to a building could last. So that was an unexpected thing that we had to go through with the city.
Yes, thanks, Fred. Yes, I understand that if you can control the waste or you can manage the waste, then the pollution will be controlled, because from the waste, the methane or carbon products are producing. So it's a great idea, as you mentioned.
And that was on the hydroponic side. On our growing on the ground, not in the ground, because we use sub-irrigated containers. When we are filling the containers with water, it is straight water that is going out if there is any overage. The fertilizer sits higher up in the system, and we also have been using organic fertilizer. So nothing really that we are doing there is hitting the ground, because it's all contained within the recycled plastic container that we're using to grow. So that although that's not a controlled environment per se, we actually are controlling the water, reducing the amount of evaporation because of how the container is built and how it works. And so we're not constantly overfilling with water. The plants get what they need. And we also have a protective shield to prevent weeds from getting in there. So it reduces the weeding aspect when you are growing. Hope that helps. Shah?
Yes, thanks, Fred, again, because as you were mentioning, you are using the organic fertilizer, not the chemical fertilizer. So this will more important to reduce the pollution to the atmosphere. Thanks, Fred, again.
Welcome.
Thank you. Any other question? We can take one more question related to economic viability of the farm. We have another challenge, which is environmental impact, and we can address the environmental impact questions later. One last question. Anyone wants to ask a question? Okay. Seems like everyone is learning a lot and processing the informations shared by our distinguished speakers. The next challenge is, as I mentioned, which is technical expertise, equipment failure, setup and design. We would like to hear from GReena. So Aki, could you please share your experiences, strategy, and the strategies in overcoming these hurdles at GReena Community Farm?
Yeah, thanks, Kinley. So definitely the facility side, the HVAC system, general fixing of the machineries can be a little bit of a challenge for me. My background's in horticulture. All I know is plants. Now that I'm alone, working in this hydroponic container, I have to deal with everything from growing to fixing filters, fixing doors, fixing the fertigation system. How indoor growing is very like machine based, automation based, software based. A lot of it is it does it on its own, really. As long as you plant it, you give your fertilizer, as long as the light's on, the humidity, it grows on its own. It's pretty simple. But because the cold winters that we're having for the past couple of weeks, the HVAC system freezes up, ice builds up, and I'm having a lot of issues. Even though we have a support team with the grocer team that provided us the container, a lot of things I just have to kind of work on my own and find solutions. It's just repetition, trial and error, just find what works for me. So that's one of the challenges I have. And then another issue is that our hydroponic container is extremely small. It's really compact, really simple. It's great, but it limits us from doing a lot of things. It's missing it. We don't have a sink. We don't have a really good drain. We don't have a cleaning area. Where I cultivate is also where I do data entry. It's also where I do my cleaning. So a lot of that is an issue for me because I'm used to, before I work with this hydroponic container, I used to work at a commercial farm where it's a lot more, 100 times, 1,000 times bigger. It has every equipment. It has all the things I need, many, many rooms, but everything is in one room. And that is a challenge. And because we work with individuals with developmental disabilities, our container is built so all of our individuals with any abilities, including people with wheelchair, can enter. We have sliding doors with a push button. We made it wider so a wheelchair can enter. We have tables that are low enough that our individuals can work while they're sitting on a wheelchair. But if you've ever worked in an agricultural setting, sometimes you're in a position, a really awkward position. It can get really uncomfortable. And that's one of the challenges that I've been seeing with our individuals.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Aki, you
how
may
are
also
you?
want to talk, you may also want to add in, when we talked about the kosher environment, that there were some things that we had to do to eliminate the issue of bugs entering or trying to mitigate that risk. You want to just explain, the
Right.
challenges
I'll
of
be
that?
talking about that in the pest and disease.
Pest and disease. Okay,
Yes.
no
Yep.
problem.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Building up on Aki's experiences, we would like to now hear from Lucía again.
So what we did when we started Raiz, we were 5 people working together to make this happen, and we have very different backgrounds. And we had one technical background, co-founder, but he was working online, and we very soon found that, yeah, to be able to have a controlled environment farm where there is a lot of hardware that needs to work properly, you need a technical person on the ground. It's very hard to figure out why the pump is working irregularly, or why there is too much water or too little water, or 1,000 things can really happen. So I would say for anyone that is interested in having a controlled environment agriculture farm that is high tech, where you have a lot of hardware components, it's kind of mandatory to have some technical person in the team that can go anytime to check out what's happening. Because we had many times some part of the hardware not working, and it's our first farm, so it makes sense that these things happen a lot when it's the first one. But even if I went to the farm at 10 p.m., I didn't have the knowledge to fix it. So you need that technical person for sure. And if you want, I can also answer Beatrice's question on the chat about leafy greens, but what are the issues with growing fruity crops like peppers, eggplants, zucchinis, which are all crops that we have been growing at the farm? The problem is not really a problem, but the problem is that you need to develop support structure. Zucchinis, eggplants, tomatoes, they are all triparts, which means that they need a structure to be able to go up and grow. And the best the structure, the more fruits you will get. So we had to do that. We had to make up this structure. But I can really, really recommend this United States brand that are doing a great job growing all sorts of veggies in hydroponic systems that are vertical. Their name is Agrotonomy, and their Instagram has amazing examples.
Seems like Lucía is having connection issue again. Maybe we can hear about the technical expert equipment failure as a challenge from Andrew.
Yeah. So I was going to talk about two things here. One was because we did take over this container from a previous installation and then renovated it. There are challenges there because it wasn't designed specifically for our needs from the outset. So a lot of the drains were already in place. A lot of the like the piping, the holes in the container, these kinds of things. There was the container has a big, I don't know, maybe I can share again, but it has a big rolling door on one side. That of course is a huge issue with keeping the container isolated from the outside, is having a giant floor to ceiling door. And so these are things that we wouldn't necessarily have chosen were we not just taking over the container initially. What that's kind of led to in terms of issues is well, it's probably a common issue. I don't know, maybe everyone can tell me that I'm the only one who's having this problem, but around condensation around the doors. So despite our best efforts to insulate everywhere, everything seems great except right around the doors. We're having issues with condensation. That's a big problem, because then we get standing water on the floor, which we have to mop up. It's not a lot, but it's enough that it's there. And I assume it won't be there in the summer, but currently in this cold weather, it is. Which I think could have been avoided with a better design. The other component that I wanted to talk about was specific failures of equipment that we weren't exactly expecting. Pumps are probably one of the things that's going to fail the most often, because it's got the most moving parts out of everything in there. The pumps that we have, I believe, have a manufacturer's defect, because a few of ours failed, and then also a few of our suppliers failed. And when they tried to return them, they did return them successfully. The supplier said, just keep them. We don't want the ones back. We'll just send them. So I think there was a unrepairable defect in that particular batch of pumps, which is a problem you can run into. And what happened was the pump screws just came unscrewed over time, and the pumps just came open, which is not great. It just means they stopped working. I could go on about other specific failures and leaks, tubing that hasn't been secured appropriately, that's just fallen off from some of the drain. So if no one's checking, then all of a sudden you have a full day's worth of seedling water draining onto the floor rather than back into the reservoir. That's a good one. Just little things that there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, and I assume that this is our first container, so everything's gonna go wrong. We're gonna see that.
Thanks, Andrew. And how are you overcoming these challenges?
Yeah, by knowing that they exist and then planning for them. So we're now keeping a spare pump. We now know to check all of the tubing all of the time, like every day. If anything moves, to just go and check everything to make sure that it's secured. Yeah, mostly with just procedural fixes rather than technological fixes.
Thank you. So the next challenge is pest and disease, and the question is to Lesley again. Last time you mentioned that there are some restrictions on pesticides used in controlled environment agriculture that doesn't apply to in-ground farming. Can you tell us more about this?
Thanks, Kinley. Can I just add one thing to the previous conversation? Another thing that I want to add is we end up having standard operating protocols so that anyone can do any job, but you have to develop all of those. So actually writing down what you're doing to solve a problem is really helpful, so you disperse the load. So not a single person is the only one who can solve everything. And then we also have scheduled timers that happen at a very particular time of the day. And then we have a remote viewing camera so someone can watch it even if they're not there, because all of these crazy things have happened. And if you have a leak, you can detect it if you have the camera going. So just definitely, you have to be quite disciplined compared to I don't know. You have to be very disciplined. Okay, so pesticides. Pests will come in the door unless you have a clean room level protocol for any vertical farm. And so that's a very different thing than an outdoor agricultural process because pests just move outdoors. And so if you're doing vertical farming or greenhouse farming, you often want to think about how people change their clothes to go into the actual workspace. That's what we often advocate, is having overalls, having a coat, something that covers over so you're not taking diseases from outdoor gardens inside. So that's the first thing. There are differences from, so I would imagine that the vast majority of folks in this group, because you're taking it from the people who are leading this, that you are approaching this in an organic fashion. Organic, of course, does not mean pesticide free, and there are limits as to how you can use any pesticide, organic or otherwise, in Canada. So if you plan to use pesticides, you should have a pesticide license, application license, number one. And so that you understand how to interact with these pesticides very safely, because they can be quite toxic. Number two, once you take that class, you're going to learn that pesticides can only be applied under very specific circumstances. So they're for killing specific things, insects or plants, which is perhaps obvious, but maybe not as obvious to the general public, is that pesticides can only be applied in very particular circumstances. So one pesticide that can be applied to an outdoor grape operation to successfully eliminate an insect cannot be applied necessarily to an indoor greenhouse for cannabis, for instance. So this is something that once you are thinking about the specific crop, you actually have to look up the federal regulations around what can be applied to your crop in the environment in which you are growing. And one of the limitations for vertical farms is there are no licensed pesticides for any indoor vertical farm at all. So, excuse me. So that means you are very limited when an outbreak occurs. So if powdery mildew gets into your vertical farm, you cannot apply something to get rid of that powdery mildew that you would normally apply outdoors or even in a greenhouse. So anything that's licensed for a greenhouse is not licensed for a vertical farm. Again, there are no licensed pesticides for vertical farms in Canada. So with that, you need to talk to your politicians about getting some pesticides licensed. That's number one. But also, the way that we work around that is we have clean protocols. So at the end of every crop, there's a huge amount of cleaning that goes through the process where the entire facility is emptied thoroughly, and it looks like Mr. Clean has lived in it for a week. And we don't use Mr. Clean because that is not actually good enough to clean the space. So there are horticultural cleaning tools that clean the inside of your irrigation pipes, that clean the troughs, that clean the pots, etc. So you want to invest in that kind of cleaning strategy. We have like written down procedures for all the cleaning, and the whole team comes out and we do it and you just get wet for a week. So that's part of it, is huge amounts of cleaning. Again, we change our clothes or we put on new clothes over top of our clothing to make sure that no pests come in with us. And then the last thing that we use are biological predators. So natural predators that naturally consume a pest. We do our best to find those. We can source them from some companies here in Ontario that are quite good at helping you identify which little tiny wasp is parasitic on aphids or spider mites or whatever. And so that's what we do when we have an outbreak of a fly, for instance, because it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And so that's how we tackle the problem. Does that address your question, Kinley?
Yes, definitely.
Great.
Thank you so much, Lesley. So one thing we can take up from Lesley's experience is that to combat the challenge of pest and disease, we have to maintain cleanliness, and then using clean tools to clean the farm. And thank you so much again. And now I would like to ask Aki, what is your experience with pest and disease control at GReena Farm?
Yeah, thank you, Kinley. So we take pests extremely seriously. Pest is a huge deal for us because we grow and sell kosher. Purity is what we look for. So what makes it kosher is if it has insect infestation. If the examiner, we call it mashkia, they find one bug in that batch, it's no longer kosher. So we really can't have any bugs in it. But in regular agriculture, it's normal to have bugs in your vegetables, especially if it's organic. But we can't allow that at all. So it's really crucial for kosher growers to not introduce any bugs into the container. Luckily, we've only had one minor bug infestation so far. A couple of weeks ago during the holidays, when I was sick, I went back to our farm and it was covered in fungus gnats. And I was stressed and everything, but it was okay. We just cleared out, like what Lesley said, do a deep clean, clear out the whole container. And let it dry out for a bit. You have to really know the bug very well, their cycles and where they thrive. Fungus gnats don't really thrive in dry environments. So we shut down everything, turn off the lights, remove all the water, and then we're able to clear it all out. So, and even if the bug is infested, the packaging businesses, they often go through a series of washing and filtering until the bugs are out. And once there's no longer any bugs, then it's now kosher. So it can be a lot of work. And sometimes if it's too infested, they wouldn't even take a look at your produce or your whole batch, and they would just say, no, we can't take it. So we take it really, really seriously. So what we do is just preventions, avoiding it. That's the key things. So we have double doors. One is the entrance door, and once you enter the room, there's a PPE room. So we have our lab coats, hair nets, booties, try to not expose our outdoor clothes. We also have a positive air pressure that shoots out from our main door. So any spores for pathogens or any bugs, pollens, it will try to blow it all out. So that's one of the things that we also do. And then once we change into our PPE rooms, we could finally enter our cultivation room. Another thing, what I do and I tell my individuals is don't go to any plants before you come to work. Don't go to any farms. Don't visit any other greenhouses. If you're going to come to the container today, just come directly to this place first, and then you could go to other places. We just can't take the risk of bringing any bugs in. Humans are the #1 vectors of bringing in bugs, especially in the winter time. Likely your home has some bugs and you might bring it into your business. So you have to be very careful. You have to change your clothes and whatnot. Yeah, it's just precautions, right? And once you introduce it, it's really hard to get rid of it. The aphids multiply from 1 to hundreds in the next couple of days. And once you get it in, it's really difficult to get rid of them. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Aki. Now we are running out of time, so maybe we can move on to the next challenge. And there's a lot of discussion about environmental impacts on controlled environment agriculture. And Lesley, if you can share us what's your take on the claims to energy and water efficiency?
Well, so this is an interesting question because I think the industry generally has really great intentions for being sustainable. and while producing enough food for the rest of the world to eat, right? Like this is the whole goal of all of this. The challenge is that there have been very few estimates of the sustainability of these systems, especially I'm thinking of vertical farms. We know relatively carefully that greenhouses can be run quite successfully and sustainably. But if you're thinking about something where there's no lights, you will see on a regular basis that many farms claim we're 95% efficient with our water. And and so that in particular comes from one study on one crop in one farm in the world. And so one of the things that creates a relatively poor name for the whole community is that everyone says that one thing, but everyone also knows it doesn't apply to every farm. And so we highly recommend that somehow you can document how much water you're using and how much water you're retaking back. So how much water are you actually using in the plant? If you create your own records, you can make your own claims that are specific to your farm. And so there are really easy water meters you can apply to your hose, and you can apply it to a drain. So you can actually capture how much water is being used in a particular amount of time. You can also weigh your produce, which I suspect is a point of pride for yourselves. So you'll know how much water is going out the door because the vast majority of the plant's biomass is water. So the vast majority of the biomass will be water. So that's the sort of thing, actually, that's a fantastic project for a student, like a Seneca student, that would be a great project for them to help you figure out so that you don't have to do it all yourself, but is something that you should not overestimate your own system's success until it's actually been measured, because it's a form of greenwashing that you're participating in.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to comment on the energy efficiency or water usage of your farm?
Actually, Kinley, before we move on to some other speakers, speaking of greenwashing, Lesley, there's a question there about whether insecticidal soaps are okay as pesticides.
I'm looking it up, but so I don't know yet, but I did see that, for instance, insecticidal soap is not registered as a pesticide for cinch bugs. So it's not a universally useful tool. And so I mean, just as a private individual with houseplants, I'll use insecticidal soap on anything. But for food, I don't think it would necessarily be, it's not always a registered pesticide. So I'm looking it up right now, but I was talking, so I couldn't, do two things at once. So I will try and get that to as soon as I have a minute to look like I'm participating, but am really distracted.
Well, I have actually distracted. I think as some of you can see, I'm also holding a baby at the same time, grandchild, while we were trying to do this. But I did manage to put into the chat an article that came across my newsfeed today of a study that McGill University participated in. It was rather interesting, talking about the fact that depending on how you do your farming in a controlled environment, that you might actually be producing more greenhouse gases than the standard outdoor gardening. I don't know if anyone, and maybe Lesley, you've got access to see the actual study, because generally I don't trust press stories. I like actually reading the research myself, but I thought by putting it in the chat, somebody might be able to actually find the real research and confirm that this was not written by an AI of some sorts that was trolling through all sorts of different databases. But yeah, the points that you made, I think, are very, very important. I think one thing that Aki hasn't mentioned is that when we built our container, we actually asked the manufacturer to do two things. One was to put in a water meter, so we actually know the amount of water coming into the container. We also have a separate electrical submeter, so we know how much our lights and the operations our costing. So we're actually now calculating exactly those two costs, adding in labor, adding in everything else, so we could know what we are growing and what we need to be able to sell it for. As Aki mentioned, we have a capacity. We can only grow 324 plants a week and keep our place completely occupied. We could expand to a fourth level, might change the mathematics on it. So we are going through and we're actually working those numbers. We're looking at the water, we're looking at the electricity, we're looking at labor hours, everything to really understand, are we doing it right? So not just from an environmental perspective, but from a financial perspective, is this working? And that's why when we shared the numbers with you earlier, we know the amount of effort it took, a paid effort for individuals who are working our various containers, whether they're volunteers or whether they are, being paid to do it, and the amount of revenue being generated back. So it's been a challenge, and one I think that you have to be very honest about. What we found is, and as we'll talk about in our final section, part of our plans as to how we're going to achieve financial self-sufficiency, and it goes beyond just thinking about the container itself, or the CEA as we've done it. So I'll turn it back to Kinley for the next section.
Thank you. Thank you so much.